Missing someone with all your heart.
Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. As you've seen from the title, today we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Diane Augat. Today's video is probably going to be a bit shorter. It's not from a lack of research, but there was not a lot of information in this case. Alright, let's get into Diane's story. Diane was a 40-year-old woman that disappeared from the Odessa, Florida area in 1998. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was offered medication at the time of her disappearance. Diane had been released from a mental health facility 2 weeks prior, and there are some strange occurrences surrounding her disappearance. But before we get to that, let's go back to the beginning. Diane Louise Augat was born to her mother Mildred on February 21st, 1958. She had one brother and one sister, and they resided outside of the Tampa, Florida area. Once she was grown, Diane married a man named Frederick, and together they had 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. Throughout the late 1970s and 80s, Diane was a stay-at-home mom and housewife. By all accounts, she was a happy person and really enjoyed motherhood. She loved to create art and spent most of her time outdoors enjoying the Florida weather. However, her life quickly began to change, and Diane found herself struggling to fit in and be normal. She eventually turned to alcohol, among other adult activities, and kind of let herself go. Diane was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sadly lost custody of her children by 1988. This was partially due to the fact that she refused to take her medication on a daily basis. In 1991, she and Frederick divorced, and that's when Diane began to spiral. She completely lost herself to alcoholism even further, and sadly started to hang out with some pretty sketchy people. She was known for being far too trusting of men she barely knew, and this eventually got her into trouble with the law. Diane had been arrested numerous times for small things like burglary and trespassing, in addition to being involuntarily institutionalized 32 times, which actually happened 2 weeks before she disappeared. She was released a short time later, which her family did not agree with. They didn't think she was stable enough to leave. However, the facility released her anyway. Diane's mother and sister convinced her to stay at her sister's house temporarily. She immediately stopped taking her medications once she was released. On April 10th, 1998, Diane's sister Deborah left for her doctor's appointment around 11 a.m. She and Diane spoke briefly, and according to Deborah, she seemed pretty normal that day. But when Deborah returned home from her appointment later that afternoon, Diane was nowhere to be found. Deborah really wasn't alarmed by this. She just assumed that Diane was out running errands and she would be back later. However, Diane never returned that evening. Given her history, Deborah still wasn't very concerned. Diane had gone missing before and would always turn up a few days later. As far as I know, none of her things were missing, and she left her medication back at home. Okay, so let's talk about where Diane went the day she left Deborah's house. Thankfully, in this case, she just didn't vanish into thin air. She kind of left a trail. It's not clear what time Diane left, but she was spotted multiple times over the next few days. On April 10th, which is the day she left Deborah's house, Diane was spotted at a pub called the Hayloft, which is located on State Road 52 in Hudson, Florida. The pub is approximately 20 miles away, which tells us that Diane either rode with her friends or hitchhiked there, given that she didn't have her own vehicle at the time. When she arrived at the pub, she ordered a few drinks, but her time there ended abruptly because the bartender decided to cut her off from alcohol. She claimed that Diane was acting erratically and was pacing the pub and walking around in circles. Diane left shortly after that, but it's unclear where she went or who she went with. She was not spotted again until the next day when a driver saw Diane walking on US Highway 19. The witness later told police that she was heading north at approximately 4 p.m. Sometime between April 11th and April 14th, Diane spent the night at Coral Sands Motel, located on US Highway 19. For some reason, it's not clear what day she stayed there or whether she was there with someone. On April 14th, a waitress spotted Diane eating lunch at the Inn on the Gulf Hotel. However, once again, it's unclear if she was there alone or with another person. That same evening, Diane attempted to call her mother Mildred. However, she wasn't home at the time. Her answering machine picked up, and Diane left a very startling message. On the message, she could be heard screaming, "Help! Let me out!" And she sounded very agitated. Mildred then heard some kind of physical struggle, as if somebody was trying to take the phone away from her. Directly after that, Diane yelled, "Hey, give me that!" And then the call was suddenly disconnected. Mildred checked the caller ID and found that it came from a place called Starlight. Obviously, she attempted to call the number back. Mildred then contacted the police, and they determined there were 6 businesses named Starlight within a 45-mile radius. However, they were unable to trace the call to anyone specifically. Mildred has stated that it sounded like Diane knew the person she was struggling with. However, that name on the caller ID never led them anywhere. The following morning, so on April 15th, a young woman was walking along the side of US Highway 19 on her way to work. She glanced down at the ground and noticed what looked like a human fingertip. The woman initially believed it was fake and went ahead and went to work. It was still bothering her by the time she went home, so she mentioned the fingertip to her boyfriend, and the boyfriend said he would go and check on it the following day. He was able to find the fingertip the next morning and decided it was real. Obviously, at that point, he contacted the police, but strangely enough, his description of the finger and his girlfriend's description of the finger differed greatly, and that led police to believe that there were actually 2 fingers. When Diane went missing, her fingers were painted kind of a teal, dark green color. However, the fingertips that were found were painted red. But because of the phone call the previous evening, they were very concerned that these fingers could belong to Diane. Police immediately searched the area and conducted an air search with a helicopter. However, they did not find any other remains or second finger. The police ran Diane's fingerprint with the finger found and determined that it was Diane's right middle finger. As if all of this wasn't bizarre enough, it was later discovered that Diane's house had been robbed. Police believe this had happened sometime between April 10th and April 14th, although investigators are not sure whether it's linked to her disappearance. Apparently, police believe that it could be a group of teenagers from Diane's neighborhood that actually knew Diane and had gotten permission to have a party at her house. Police didn't really pursue the robbery any further than that. 3 days after Diane's fingertip was found, a convenience store manager noticed a bag of clothes inside the freezer of his store. They were folded neatly and placed inside of a plastic bag. To make it even more bizarre, this store was located only a mile away from Diane's house, and her sister was a cashier there. When the manager questioned Deborah about the clothes, Deborah told her that she was not aware of how they got there, but that they did belong to Diane. When the police looked into it further, they stated that they believed it was the teenagers that placed the clothes in the freezer, and they were unsure if it happened before or after her disappearance. So basically, they knew she stayed at the hotel after leaving her sister's house, but not sure when. They knew that her house had been burglarized, but not sure when and not sure by who. They found clothes in a freezer of a convenience store, but they didn't know if it was linked to her disappearance, or who put them there, or when they were put there. But yeah, sounds good. Let's just blame it on the teenagers. The Tampa Bay Times newspaper decided to publish an article about her disappearance in November of 2000. They had hopes it would bring in more tips and reignite the investigation, which actually did happen only 1 day later. The day after the article ran, a woman named Terry Wilson, who oddly enough was dating Diane's brother at the time, went into a Circle K located in Hudson. She went in to purchase a soda and a pack of cigarettes, but when she approached the counter, she noticed a large Ziploc bag lying on the lottery counter. The bag had Diane's name written on it with black permanent marker. This shocked Terry, and she grabbed the bag so she could report it to the police. Inside, she found a black eyeliner, a bottle of Taboo perfume, a tube of bright pink lipstick, as well as a tube of generic toothpaste that was identical to the one that Diane had received from the mental health facility just before her disappearance. This Circle K was located in the Viva Villas neighborhood, which coincidentally, Diane had been arrested in a few months prior to her disappearance. Mildred later confirmed that the items in the bag did belong to Diane, but this is where her case goes cold yet again. There really haven't been any updates since 2000. Police only named one person of interest in Diane's disappearance, but did not actually find any evidence linking him to the crime. That man is Gary Robert Evers, and he happened to be the manager at the Coral Sands Motel that Diane was last seen at. As far as we know, there is no real evidence that ties him to Diane. However, it should be noted that he was arrested in 2001 and was later convicted of murder after ending a man's life over an argument. He is currently serving life in prison, but has never confessed to even knowing Diane Augat. I think it's also important to note that police didn't name him a person of interest until after he was arrested for another crime. And it was only because he worked at the motel that she was last seen at. I'm not saying that he didn't do it, but it seems like they were just trying to find someone to blame. Alright, let's talk about theories. Normally, there are a lot of theories surrounding these types of cases. However, Diane's case has been mostly ignored and overlooked. It doesn't seem like police followed up on many leads. And I think it's most likely because Diane wasn't the perfect victim. She wasn't a wealthy white woman who was so beautiful and lit up a room when she walked into it. Diane struggled with mental illness. She was struggling with substance abuse, was too trusting of men, and had run away before. So therefore, her case didn't gain national attention. I've thought a lot about this case. There are only a few small pieces of evidence, but I think there are a few scenarios of what could have happened to Diane. The first theory is that Diane was possibly abducted and put into human trafficking. I do find this one to be the least likely, and I'll tell you why. Diane is more at risk because she struggled with addiction and mental illness, which was not being treated at the time of her disappearance. Her mother described her as far too trusting. However, I feel that when human trafficking is involved, there usually aren't a lot of clues left behind. Human traffickers are professionals, and more often than not, they make a pretty clean getaway. However, in Diane's disappearance, she was not only able to call her mother, but her fingers and her clothing were left behind. And once again, her mother stated that it sounded like she knew the person she was struggling with on the phone. If Diane was taken by human traffickers, why would they leave so much evidence behind? Why would they put her clothing in a convenience store freezer? Why would they come back 2 years later and leave more evidence at the Circle K? That just doesn't add up to me. Theory number 2 is that Diane met someone the day she left her sister's home and stayed with them over the next few days. It's possible that she could have known this person previously, or that it was someone new, and she willingly chose to stay the night with them at the hotel. They were maybe romantically involved, and at some point an argument ensued, which ultimately led to Diane's disappearance. Although, aside from her fingertip, none of Diane's remains have been found. None of Diane's remains have ever been found. And if this happened at the motel, and it was gruesome enough that Diane's fingertip was cut off, wouldn't there be evidence of some sort left behind there? Unless Gary Evers was involved. Is it possible that he kidnapped Diane? Given the fact that police never suspected him until after he was arrested for another crime, he had plenty of time to get rid of evidence. It's likely that because Diane was known to be there before she disappeared, the police probably came and talked to him, which makes it obvious that the police are doing an investigation and he needs to hide evidence. My last theory is one that I don't really take lightly, and I hope that I'm wrong. I don't ever like to be disrespectful to the family in my videos, but this theory is the most widely believed theory that's floating around. And it is that Diane's family was somehow involved in her disappearance. I do find it strange that Diane's clothing was found in the freezer of the convenience store that Deborah worked at. I'm sorry, but I struggle to believe that teenage kids would put them there. To further this, Diane's personal belongings were found 2 years later at another convenience store by none other than Diane's sister-in-law. If this was some psychopath leaving clues behind, how would they know that she would be going in there and recognize the items? Or was that the plan? I just don't get the point of that. Unless this was staged to be found. I've said since I've started my channel, I don't believe in coincidences. I do believe it's a possibility that members of our family could be involved and are simply trying to cover their tracks or throw investigators off. However, it's really hard for me to say one way or another with such little information. I'm just a little skeptical of that story. What do you guys think happened to Diane with the little bit of information that we know? Do you think it was human trafficking? Do you think it was some unknown person? Or do you think that her family really could be involved? Do you think it's a little suspicious that they're the only ones discovering the evidence? Or it's being found in places that they're involved with? Let me know in the comments. If you have any information about Diane's disappearance, I'll have links down below to file a report. If you can, please share this video, especially if you're local in Florida, because Diane deserves justice, and no one seems to really care about her case, and no one is fighting for her. But that's all I got for you today, guys. If you haven't subscribed yet, please be sure to do so, and hit that notifications bell for future uploads. And as always, remember the name, Kasey Shane. I'm out.